Today, we're looking at the scariest users on Reddit, accounts that made people question whether they were witnessing fiction or something much worse. Reddit wasn't designed to be dangerous. In fact, on the surface, it looks harmless. It's a place for advice, for memes, for people who just want to talk to someone who understands them. But the same systems that make Reddit comforting also make it perfect for something much darker. Unlike most social platforms, Reddit doesn't ask you to be a person. There's no profile picture by default, no real name, no pressure to prove that you exist beyond the words you type. You can create an account in seconds, say something disturbing, and vanish forever. And most of the time, nobody will ever know. This kind of anonymity changes how people behave. Psychologists call it online disinhibition, when the absence of identity removes the mental brakes that normally stop people from crossing lines. On Reddit, those brakes barely exist. Users don't just share opinions here. They share secrets, confessions, thoughts they would never say out loud. And Reddit doesn't punish that behavior. It rewards it. The more shocking a post is, the more attention it gets. The more unsettling it feels, the higher it climbs. Upvotes don't care whether something is healthy, ethical, or even true. They only care whether people stop scrolling. Over time, this creates a feedback loop. A user posts something disturbing and receives attention, so they post again and again. Each time they push a little further. What starts as oversharing slowly turns into fixation. Reddit's structure makes this even worse. Subreddits act like echo chambers, gathering people with the same interests into isolated spaces. Most of those spaces are harmless, and I could grasp what, but some aren't. In certain corners of the site, extreme behavior isn't discouraged, it's normalized. Obsession becomes validation. Fixation becomes identity. And because usernames are disposable, there's no long-term accountability. If a user is confronted, they don't have to explain themselves. They can simply delete the account and start over with the new name, but carrying the same thoughts with them. This is where things begin to change, because when someone realizes they can say anything without consequences, they eventually test how far that freedom goes. And sometimes what they reveal isn't a story, it's not a joke, and it's not creative writing. It's something they've been holding back for a long time. At first, these warning signs are easy to miss. A strange comment here, an overly detailed post there. Nothing alarming on its own, but Reddit has a memory. Every comment, every submission, every edit leaves behind a pattern. And when users start looking closely, those patterns become impossible to ignore. One of the most common signs appears in language. Certain users write with an unusual emotional distance. They describe disturbing events the way someone might describe the weather calmly, precisely, without hesitation. No panic, no remorse, no attempt to justify themselves. Just facts. This immediately sets them apart. Most people, even when lying or role-playing, can't maintain that tone for long. Emotion slips through. Contradictions appear. But some accounts never break character. They post the same way every time. Across different subreddits. Across months. Sometimes years. Another red flag is consistency. When someone is fabricating a story, details tend to change. Timelines shift. Names are forgotten. But the scariest Reddit users don't contradict themselves. Their accounts read like documentation. Dates line up. Locations remain vague but stable. It's like the descriptions stay unnervingly precise. Redditors began noticing this pattern again and again. An account would surface in a niche subreddit, sometimes one focused on advice, sometimes one focused on confessions. At first, the post would seem strange but harmless, and then someone would click the username, and everything would change. Because when you view an entire account at once, the mask starts to slip. What look like isolated posts suddenly form a narrative, a progression. Early posts test the waters, later ones become bolder, more specific, more disturbing. And when other users start asking questions, these accounts rarely respond emotionally. They don't argue, etc. They don't defend themselves. They don't clarify. They either ignore the comments completely or reply with short, unsettling answers that raise more questions than they answer. Another unsettling detail is timing. Some of these users post at odd hours, always late at night, always during the same window, day after day. To most people, that means nothing. But to Redditors who've seen this before, it's a sign of routine, a habit, something being revisited repeatedly. And then there's the biggest warning sign of all. When users stop asking for validation, and most people who post confessions want reassurance. They want absolution. They want someone to tell them they're not a bad person. But the scariest Reddit users don't want forgiveness and they don't want advice, and though they don't even want to be believed. They just want to say it. Eventually, patterns stop being abstract. What once felt like overanalysis turns into something much harder to ignore. Because in several cases, Reddit users began noticing that posts weren't just disturbing, they were accurate. Details shared by certain accounts lined up with real-world events in ways that were difficult to explain, not public information, not headlines. Small specifics that only made sense after something happened. A time frame that matched police reports. A location described just vaguely enough to avoid confirmation, yet close enough to be unsettling. An outcome predicted before anyone else was talking about it. At first, people dismiss it as coincidence. Reddit is massive. Someone somewhere is always going to guess correctly eventually. But the problem was repetition. These weren't one-off posts. The same accounts kept doing it. Again and again. And when users pointed it out, the response wasn't panic. It was silent. No clarification. No denial. No attempt to walk anything back. Just more posts written in the same calm tone, following the same structure, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. That's when a different kind of fear set in. Not the fear of monsters hiding in the dark, but the fear that some people don't see what they're doing is wrong. Because the scariest thing about these users isn't what they say, it's how casually they say it. Reddit gives people the ability to fragment themselves, to create versions that exist only in text. And for most users, those versions are exaggerated, fictional, or harmless. But for a few, the account isn't a mask. It's a release, a place where thoughts can exist without consequences, where confessions don't have faces, where no one can see your reaction when you type something you should never say out loud. That's why these accounts don't feel like stories. They feel unfinished. They stop suddenly, without resolution, without explanation. And because Reddit doesn't require closure, those loose ends stay loose forever. The account might be deleted, it might go inactive, or it might still be posting buried somewhere deep in a comment thread no one thinks to check. And that's what makes Reddit different from any other platform, not the content itself, but the fact that you never really know who's on the other side of the screen. Because somewhere among millions of usernames, there are people who aren't role-playing, they're documenting. And the only reason we notice them at all is because they decide to type instead of staying silent. And the first account we're going to look at is one that knew far too much, far too early. The account didn't stand out at first. No strange username. No disturbing profile description. No obvious red flags. It appeared in a small subreddit dedicated to discussing local crime. The kind of place where people speculate, share news links, and argue over details that rarely matter. At first, the posts were short. You comment correcting a timeline. A reply pointing out a detail that others had missed. Nothing alarming, just someone who seemed unusually well informed. But over time, people began to notice something strange. This user wasn't just reacting to events. They were anticipating them. In one thread, before authorities released any information, the account mentioned the location where evidence would later be found, not directly. Just a casual reference, the kind that looks meaningless until you scroll back days later. In another discussion, they suggested an outcome that hadn't even been considered yet. When it happened, users returned to the comment in disbelief. At first, the community brushed it off. Lucky guesses, coincidences, confirmation bias. Reddit is full of armchair detectives, and most of them are wrong most of the time. Nobody wanted to believe this was different. But then the pattern repeated. Again, the user commented early. Again, they focused on specifics no one else was discussing. And again, those specifics became relevant only after new information emerged. That's when users started clicking the username. What they found was unsettling. The account didn't just comment on one case. It followed several across different cities, different time periods, different subreddits, yet the writing style never changed. The same detached tone, the same careful wording, the same refusal to speculate emotionally. It read less like discussion and more like observation. As if the user wasn't guessing what would happen next, as if they already knew. One Redditor finally asked the question everyone else was thinking. They replied to one of the comments and wrote something simple. "Fa, how do you know that?" The response came hours later. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't sarcastic. It was only 6 words long. It's the most likely outcome. No explanation, no elaboration. And that answer only made things worse. The moment that changed everything came quietly. No viral posts, no dramatic confrontation, just a single comment buried deep in a thread that most people ignored. A new case had just been posted, early details barely confirmed. Most of the comments were speculation, theories stacked on top of rumors. Then the account appeared. The comment wasn't long. It didn't accuse anyone. It didn't sound confident. It simply stated that authorities would focus on a specific area, and that they would find what they were looking for there. No source was provided. No I think, no maybe, just a statement. Hours later, a local news update dropped. Police had officially announced they were expanding their search, go to the exact area mentioned in the comment. That's when people started saving screenshots. Users began replying directly, asking questions. Some joked, some accused the account of roleplaying, but others felt something shift because this wasn't a prediction after the fact. The timestamp was clear. The comment came first. When pressed, the account didn't back down, and it didn't delete anything. It didn't clarify. Instead, it continued posting calmly, consistently, as if the attention didn't exist. A few users started digging deeper. They cross-referenced older comments with archived news articles. They compared dates. They lined up timelines. And what they found made them uneasy. Details that looked harmless on their own suddenly became disturbing in context. A reference to a method before it was publicly released. A mention of timing that later matched official report. None of it was enough to be proof, but taken together it was impossible to ignore. One Redditor summarized the feeling perfectly in a reply that gained traction. They wrote, "This doesn't feel like guessing, this feels like someone checking their own work." That comment stayed at the top of the thread for hours. The account never responded to it. Instead, it made a new comment in a different subreddit, on a completely unrelated case. And once again, it focused on details no one else was paying attention to. That's when moderators stepped in, not to ban the account, not to accuse it of anything, but to slow things down. Threads were locked, comments were removed, users were warned not to speculate irresponsibly. Officially, it was about preventing misinformation. Unofficially, people suspected something else, because the account was still active, still commenting, still watching, and it seemed completely unconcerned with the growing suspicion around it. The final comment didn't happen during a major update. There was no breaking news, no announcement, no sudden development, just a quiet thread late at night discussing a case that had gone cold. Most people had already stopped paying attention. The account posted once more. The comment was brief, almost careless. It mentioned that the case wouldn't remain unsolved much longer, and that when it resurfaced, the public would focus on the wrong detail. That was it. No follow-up, no replies, and no explanation. Hours passed, then days. Nothing happened. Skeptics felt vindicated, and believers grew quieter, and the account went silent. Weeks later, the case was reopened. New information surfaced, and exactly as the comment suggested, public attention fixated on a detail that ultimately didn't matter. Behind the scenes, investigators revealed they had been working a different angle the entire time. The thread was rediscovered almost immediately. Users returned, scrolling through old comments with a new sense of dread, because the timing lined up perfectly. The account had stopped posting the same night the case was quietly reopened. No farewell message, no deleted history, no sudden outburst, just silence. People tried to reach out. Messages went unanswered. Comments received no replies. Eventually, someone noticed something else. The account hadn't been banned. It hadn't been suspended. It was still there. It just wasn't posting anymore. Redditors debated what it meant. Some believed the user had simply gotten bored. Others thought the attention became too much. But a darker theory began circulating, that the account was never meant to last forever, that it existed for a purpose, to observe, to document, to speak just enough, and then disappear. Because whoever was behind it never seemed interested in recognition. They didn't want credit. They didn't want to be believed. They just wanted the information to exist, and that's what made the account truly unsettling. Not the predictions, not the timing, but the possibility that it was never trying to prove anything at all. It was just speaking, because it already knew. And as disturbing as that account was, the next one is worse, because it never disappeared, and it never stopped being itself. Most disturbing Reddit accounts unravel eventually. They contradict themselves. They react emotionally. They slip up. This one never did. The account appeared years ago in a subreddit meant for personal stories. not horror, not fiction, just people talking about their lives. At first glance, the posts didn't seem alarming. They were quiet, short, almost boring. The user described daily routines, work schedules, ordinary interactions with strangers, but something about the writing felt off. There were no emotions attached to any of it. Good days and bad days were described the same way. Stressful events received the same attention as minor inconveniences. Everything was flattened into neutral observation. At first, readers assumed it was a writing quirk. Some people just expressed themselves differently, but the posts kept coming, week after week, month after month, always the same tone, always the same detachment. Even when the subject matter changed, the delivery never did. The account never joked, never asked questions, never responded to comments. It posted and disappeared until the next update. Over time, the content shifted. The routines became more specific. The observations are more focused. The user began describing interactions with the same people repeatedly. Coworkers, neighbors, strangers encountered at the same locations. Names were never used, only roles. The man at the counter, the woman on the stairs, the person who waits. Readers began scrolling back through older posts looking for patterns, and they found them. Certain individuals appeared again and again, always described in the same way, always observed from a distance. What unsettled people most was the lack of curiosity. The account never wondered why people behaved the way they did, never questioned motives, never expressed confusion. It was simply recorded like a log or a report. One commenter finally asked what everyone else was thinking, and they wrote, "Why do you talk about people like this?" The comment received dozens of upvotes. The account replied for the first time in months. The response was a single sentence: "It's easier this way." And then the account went silent again. After that reply, people began paying closer attention, not to what the account was saying, but to what it never said. There were no opinions, no reflections, no emotional language at all. Words like happy, angry, afraid never appeared, even when describing events that should have triggered some reaction. Instead, everything was filtered through the same clinical lens. One post described witnessing an argument. Another mentioned someone being injured. Both were written the exact same way. Same sentence length, same pacing, same neutral tone. Redditors started comparing posts side by side, and that's when the theory emerged that this account wasn't trying to communicate with people, it was trying to catalog them. The posts followed a loose structure. Time, location, observation are always in that order. No conclusions, no interpretations, just records. Some users suggested it was an experiment, a writing exercise, a form of performance art. But the problem was consistency. Performance requires awareness of an audience. This account behaved as if no one was watching. Even when comments questioned its behavior, the post didn't change. No adjustments, no defensiveness, no attempt to explain, but the account never acknowledged the theories about it. It simply continued posting the same way it always had. And then the content grew more unsettling. The observations became more intrusive. The user began describing where people stood, how long they stayed in certain places, what time they arrived, what time they left. Akaye, still no emotion, still no context. Just details. Readers began asking whether the account was safe to leave up. Moderators reviewed it and found nothing technically wrong. No threats, no explicit wrongdoing, just documentation. And that made it harder to act, because everything the account posted could be explained away individually. But taken together, it painted a picture of someone watching very closely. Too closely. One Redditor summed it up in a comment that quietly spread across threads. They wrote, "This reads like someone practicing how to observe people without being noticed." The account never replied. But his next post arrived sooner than usual, and it focused on just one person. The post was simple. It described a person walking through a park. The exact time, the exact path, the exact bench where they paused. Nothing unusual at first glance, but the unnerving detail was the precision. Not only did the user describe the path, they also included small habits. The way the person held their bag, how they shifted their weight while waiting, the pattern of glances around them. Readers scrolled through the comments in disbelief. No one could figure out how the account knew these things. And yet, when some tried to follow the timeline, and compare it to public posts or local discussions. It all matched, every small detail lined up, almost like someone had been there silently taking notes. The community grew uneasy. Speculation turned into fear. Was this just obsessive attention to detail, or something more deliberate? Other users began analyzing earlier posts in this light. They noticed subtle recurring patterns that seemed to track real people's daily lives, not just random strangers in passing told, but individuals referenced multiple times across months or even years. People who existed in public spaces whose routines could be observed without drawing attention. No names, no faces, and no photos, just records. The account never acknowledged these analyses, no replies, no corrections, no guidance. It was as if the observer didn't care whether anyone noticed, or perhaps wanted them to notice without saying a word. And then came the unsettling escalation. One post described an interaction that was private, small, and unlikely to be witnessed by anyone else, something that only the person being observed could know. Redditors immediately recognized the impossibility. They speculated, they debated, they feared. Moderators were notified. But again, the account hadn't broken any rules. It hadn't threatened anyone. It had simply described events. The fear came not from illegal activity, but from the implication that someone had been paying attention for a very long time, without being seen, without breaking character. The account continued, and as months passed, the pattern didn't stop. The posts became slightly more detailed. The observations are more refined, but the tone, the complete absence of emotion remained constant. Readers began to share archived posts outside the subreddit. Discussion spread to forums and social media. The account had developed a reputation as the user who never breaks character. Some tried to rationalize it. A role-playing project, that Gucci, a psychological experiment, an obsessive hobby. But every explanation had a problem. The account didn't seek attention. It didn't react. It didn't explain it. It didn't defend. It simply existed. And that's what made it so terrifying. Because when an account posts like this for years, never breaking character, never slipping, never stopping, it stops feeling like a person using Reddit. It starts feeling like Reddit itself, cold, detached, observing. And if the user who never broke character unsettled the community, the next account went even further, not just recording but hinting at things no one wanted to think about. This account was different, not just detailed, not just detached, not just observing. This account claimed reality. It didn't post to entertain, it didn't post to gain followers, it didn't even ask for attention. It posted what it called records, logs of events, descriptions of people, observations of places. But the unsettling part was the insistence. This is not a story. That phrase appeared again and again, often in the first line of a post, a warning or perhaps a declaration, a reminder to readers this is real. Early posts were vague. Situations described could be mistaken for fiction, but as time passed, the details became chillingly specific. The account described incidents that weren't public knowledge, things that were difficult to explain unless someone was there. Users began comparing the posts to news articles, public records, and local discussions. And the coincidences weren't coincidences. Locations, times, and outcomes matched exactly. Sometimes the only difference was the perspective. The account often described mundane actions that only someone present could know, the way someone moved their hand, a bag placed on a chair, a glance exchanged between strangers. The tone never changed, emotionless, a matter-of-fact, observational, no judgment, no speculation, no dramatization. And yet, despite the lack of emotion, readers felt horror, because the events weren't impossible, so they were plausible, and they were happening to real people. Redditors began asking the obvious questions. Who are you? Why are you posting this? Are you okay? The account never responded to those questions directly. Instead, it posted more records, more observations, and more reality. And the signature phrase always appeared, this is not a story. It became a kind of mantra, a way to remind readers that they were not reading fiction, that what they were seeing was happening somewhere, to someone, somewhere right now. Then came a post that made even the most skeptical Redditors uneasy. It wasn't a prediction. It wasn't a confession. It was an event being described as it unfolded. The account detailed the surroundings, the people present, the exact words spoken, almost like someone was transcribing a live scene. And yet, the post appeared on Reddit hours before anyone else reported it. Some users dismissed it as luck. Some thought it was research. Some feared it was something else entirely. The implication was simple, terrifying, and inescapable. This account wasn't creating stories. It was documenting events. Events that were real, events that other people couldn't see yet. Events that nobody was supposed to know. As more posts appeared, the pattern became impossible to ignore. The account didn't just describe events, it described them with exacting detail. The way someone held an object, the specific words exchanged between strangers, the subtle sounds in the environment, doors opening, footsteps echoing, distant voices, and yet no one could confirm the source. No one could verify the account's claims. All that remained were the posts themselves. Redditors started noticing something else. Some posts weren't about strangers. They weren't about general events. They were about situations that suggested personal involvement. The account described actions that seemed to require proximity, observations that could not be made from afar, situations that implied surveillance. Yet the tone never wavered. No excitement, no remorse, no admission of wrongdoing, just matter-of-fact documentation. Comments on these posts ranged from disbelief to fear. People debated whether the account was role-playing and writing fiction or documenting reality. But the phrase, "this is not a story," hung over every discussion like a warning. Some users dug deeper. Archive posts, patterns of timestamps, connections between seemingly unrelated events, and they found a chilling consistency. The account appeared to be tracking individuals, not random people, not public figures, but ordinary individuals moving through ordinary lives. The level of detail was staggering. Where they walked, what they carried, who they spoke to, when they spoke. Even seemingly trivial actions were recorded. Redditors began theorizing. Some suggested it was an elaborate social experiment. Others believed it was a deeply immersive roleplay project, but a few users feared something far worse, because the posts implied knowledge no one outside of those situations should have had. And then came the post that changed everything. It described an event that had not yet been reported anywhere else. A minor incident, someone injured in a car accident, a location of a burglary, a confrontation in a park, ordinary events. Yet the account described them hours before any news or police report. The post included precise details, the exact position of the injured person, the manner in which a vehicle was parked, the dialogue exchanged, and it ended with the familiar line, "This is not a story." Users scrolled back, comparing timestamps, checking for edits, verifying archives. It all matched. The incident happened just as the account described. No one knew how. No one knew why. And no one could explain the calm, detached tone in which it was documented. For many, it wasn't just creepy, it was horrifying. This wasn't a Reddit account posting stories. It was a witness in the chronicler. A presence in events that should have been invisible. And the longer the account posted, the more impossible it became to dismiss, and no emotion, no engagement, no apparent desire for recognition, just observation. And the phrase that kept appearing over and over became something more than a disclaimer. It became a warning saying, "This is not a story." The realization came slowly. At first, users were simply unsettled by the accuracy of the posts. Then they began to notice something far worse, and some events weren't just being observed. Some were being hinted at before they occurred, or described in ways that suggested the account knew details no outsider could possibly know. One post, seemingly mundane, described a confrontation between two people in a secluded area. It included the exact words spoken, the placement of objects, and the reactions of both parties. Hours later, a Redditor discovered a report of the same incident with a different source claiming the same details. The community began to panic quietly. Was this account just lucky or involved? Another post contained a reference to a minor crime. The account described how it would unfold, almost in the form of a timeline. And again, later that day, the incident occurred exactly as predicted. At that point, many users stopped viewing the post as mere observations. They began seeing confessions hidden in plain sight. Some posts were almost casual in tone. The window was left unlocked again. It didn't take long for someone to notice. The person hesitated at the corner. By the time they moved on, it was too late. To outsiders, these could have been coincidences. To those following the account carefully, they were far too precise, far too consistent. Moderators reviewed the account repeatedly. No threats, no explicit admissions of wrongdoing, nothing that violated Reddit's terms. Yet the fear lingered, because even without breaking rules, The account implied things most people never wanted it to think about. And then came the post that cemented its reputation. It described a situation involving a person who had disappeared the day before, not a public figure, not someone in the news, an ordinary person. The account wrote about where the person had been last seen, not what they were wearing, who they had interacted with, even the subtle movements they made while waiting. And yet, the account never indicated any knowledge of the investigation. No police report cited that, no outside sources reference, just observation, the detached, emotionless, precise observation. Redditors panicked. Some archived every post, some tried to trace IPs, usernames, and activity. Most simply stopped posting about it because they realized the account's reach wasn't about fame or attention. It wasn't about storytelling. It was about documenting events as they happened. Some theorized it was a vigilante. Others whispered darker possibilities, that the account was closer to the events than anyone could imagine. And yet, despite all this, the post continued. No dramatization, no panic, no moral judgment. Only the repeated refrain, "This is not a story." It became clear to the community that this account was in a league of its own. Not just disturbing, not just clever, but terrifying in its calm, consistent certainty. Because when someone posts like this for years, documenting reality without deviation, without emotion, without audience engagement, it stops being a Reddit user. It starts feeling like an entity observing everything, everywhere, all the time. And that realization that someone somewhere was documenting events as they happened, and we could see only fragments of it, was what made the account truly unforgettable. But even as users recoiled from the posts, the next account would show that some users aren't content with just observing. Some leave behind traces that Reddit itself tries to erase. Some Reddit accounts are unsettling because of what they post, some because of what they reveal about people, and some because of what they make people fear. This account belonged to the last category. It wasn't just documenting events. It wasn't just observing. It was leaving traces that the platform itself seemed intent on removing. The account first appeared in a small, obscure subreddit. The posts were strange but not immediately alarming. Short observations, random details, oddly phrased questions. But over time, a pattern emerged. The posts began referencing incidents that were sensitive, controversial, or criminal in nature. Not rumors, not public knowledge. Details that suggested inside information that moderators and administrators might have preferred stayed hidden. And that's when things started to change. Threads featuring the account's posts began disappearing. Comments were deleted. Other users reported that their replies vanished without warning. The account itself was flagged multiple times, but each time it resurfaced. It became apparent that someone, either moderators or Reddit's automated systems, was actively trying to remove the content. But the account had a strategy. Every time a post was deleted, the user reposted it, often in a slightly different form, sometimes with added detail, sometimes in a different subreddit. And each time the content survived for a little longer than before. It was as if the account was testing the boundaries, exploring exactly how far it could go before someone noticed, before someone acted. Some posts were innocuous in isolation, a description of an event, a comment on a thread, but taken together they formed a web of information, connections that were invisible until someone pieced them together. Reddit users who followed the account started archiving everything. Screenshots, cached pages, copies of deleted comments. The fear wasn't just in what the account posted, it was in how untraceable it could become. Moderators tried blocking certain subreddits, admins tried temporary suspensions, but the user had a method to continue posting without attracting permanent bans. Some theorized it was automated, a bot designed to repost deleted content endlessly. Others believed it was a person with deep technical knowledge of Reddit systems. The account didn't interact with anyone directly. No engagement, no replies, no arguments. It was just posted. And if something disappeared, it posted it again. And that's what made it terrifying. Because the account seemed to understand Reddit in a way most users could not. It knew where it could post, what content could survive, which corners of the platform were least monitored. And when moderators or admins tried to intervene, the account adapted. It wasn't random, it wasn't chaotic, it was deliberate. The account's posts began attracting attention outside its usual subreddit. Some users noticed threads disappearing almost immediately after the account commented. Others discovered that old posts which had existed for months suddenly vanished from archives. But even with deletions, some posts survived or were mirrored by other users. It was through these fragments that a chilling picture began to emerge. The account wasn't just posting observations. It was referencing events that were ongoing or involved individuals who weren't public figures. Sometimes the posts suggested knowledge of legal investigations, private disputes, or crimes that had not yet been reported. One user compiled a timeline using archive fragments. A post describing an incident in a suburban neighborhood. Another mentioning a person's whereabouts hours before police received a tip. A third detailing interactions that, if accurate, could only have been witnessed firsthand. When cross-referenced with public reports, the fragments matched with astonishing precision. Moderators had removed some posts citing privacy concerns or potential threats, but the user found ways around these measures. They reposted in private subreddits. They slightly reworded content to avoid automatic filters. They even reposted in unrelated communities where moderators were unlikely to notice. Redditors watching the account realized it had learned the platform's limitations. It exploited gaps in moderation, and it used anonymity as a shield, and it operated with a deliberate patience that suggested experience. One particularly disturbing post appeared on a subreddit dedicated to confessions. The account described a scenario in detail. Someone entering a home at night, objects being moved, interactions between people in the household. The post didn't explicitly admit wrongdoing. It didn't brag. It didn't dramatize. But moderators removed it almost immediately. The post reappeared later, slightly reworded. This time, the phrasing suggested it was a scenario they had observed elsewhere. Users noted that the content itself remained the same. The account's adaptation wasn't about evading rules, it was about continuing the record. Over time, a theory formed. The account wasn't just posting, it was testing boundaries, documenting not only events but Reddit's capacity to erase those events. Some theorized it was an experiment in digital persistence. Others whispered darker possibilities, that the accounts existed to expose secrets, track individuals, or even manipulate situations. The chilling part was this: the account showed no concern for being caught. It didn't interact with users directly. It didn't comment on moderation or bans. It didn't respond to questions. It simply continued its activity, posting fragments of reality where they could survive. Oh, and the community started noticing something even stranger. The account occasionally posted information that hadn't yet been reported anywhere else, and moderators had removed it before it could reach a wider audience. Fragments remained, but only the diligent few could piece them together. It was as if the account was leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for those willing to follow while simultaneously testing Reddit's limits. Eventually the account disappeared. Not banned, not deactivated, just gone. But the traces it left behind told a story that was impossible to ignore. Users who had been following it closely scoured archives, cached pages, screenshots, anything that could reconstruct its activity, and what they found was unsettling. The account had posted with precision on intent and patience. Every comment, every fragment, every repost was part of a larger pattern. Not random, not careless, but I stayed deliberate. Moderators had intervened repeatedly, removing content for privacy or safety reasons. Admins had issued temporary suspensions, yet the account always found a way to return. The final disappearance wasn't dramatic, no last post, no farewell, no hint of why it stopped. But Reddit users piecing together its history noticed something curious. Its final posts were more fragmented than usual, often cut short or reposted in multiple locations with slight variations. It was as if the account was leaving behind clues while fading into the background. Some threads vanished entirely. Some comments lingered only in archives. Some were mirrored by other users who had been following the account obsessively. The account's existence had become almost mythical. Redditors referred to it as the ghost account, not because it was deleted, but because its traces seemed to haunt every corner it had touched. The fear wasn't in what the account had posted. It was in what could never be confirmed. Some fragments hinted at crimes or sensitive situations. Some suggested knowledge of investigations that moderators tried to suppress, or others implied interactions that were impossible to verify. And yet, taken together, the fragments painted a picture of someone operating beyond Reddit's reach. Someone who understood the platform's limitations and used them to continue documenting reality. The disappearance didn't end the fear. It amplified it. Because the account had proved that it could leave a lasting mark even without being seen, even without being acknowledged, even without ever interacting directly with its audience. Users who followed the trail began sharing the fragments with caution. Screenshots, archives, timelines, warnings not to seek out the account directly. Some reported anxiety, paranoia, and sleepless nights after reading through its posts. The legacy was clear. Accounts can be erased, posts can be deleted. Moderators and admins can intervene, but patterns, fragments, and observations can persist, sometimes far longer than anyone expects. Some Redditors speculated the account had been shut down intentionally, by admins, by law enforcement, or perhaps by the user themselves. Others whispered that it might return, because accounts like this don't vanish out of nowhere. They evolve, they adapt, and they resurface when the right moment comes. And that's what makes them terrifying. Even years later, users searching old threads stumble across fragments, small pieces of a puzzle that will never be fully solved. The account wasn't just disturbing for what it posted, it was disturbing because it showed the limits of control. Even a platform as vast as Reddit cannot erase someone who understands its weaknesses. And somewhere, in some corner of the site, the account may still be watching, still documenting, still leaving breadcrumbs that few will ever notice. And even as the ghost account faded from view, other users continued to haunt Reddit. Some are still active today, posting content that keeps communities on edge. Most of the accounts we discussed have disappeared, some vanished quietly, some were deleted, some stopped posting for reasons we'll never know, but not all. Some accounts are still active, still posting, still drawing attention, and the unnerving part, they haven't changed. Not their tone, not their behavior, not the unsettling patterns that made them famous or infamous in the first place. These accounts continue to operate under the radar, sometimes in obscure subreddits, sometimes buried in threads with little visibility, but always present, always there. The posts are subtle. At first glance, they seem ordinary, a comment correcting a fact, a minor observation, a reply that seems harmless. But for those who know, the signs are unmistakable. The tone is the same, detached, matter of fact, emotionless. The observations are precise, too precise to be random, but too consistent to be coincidence. And when you follow the trail, the accounts reveal themselves. They post information that can't be verified immediately, details that later appear in news reports or personal accounts, hints that only make sense in retrospect. Redditors who track these accounts describe a feeling of unease that grows over time, because the content isn't dramatic, it isn't fictional, it isn't even sensational, it's just accurate. Calmly, quietly, unnervingly accurate. Some accounts hint at events that could be considered crimes. Some focus on personal lives. Some describe interactions in public places, but the pattern is always the same: observation, documentation, repetition, silence when questioned. Moderators occasionally remove posts, admins sometimes intervene, but the accounts always adapt. They find a way to remain active. And the most frightening part? There's no indication that the users behind these accounts intend harm. They don't post threats. They don't brag. They don't directly engage with other users. And yet, just by existing, they create fear. Because the implication is clear. Someone, somewhere, is watching, documenting, recording, and they don't need to prove anything. They don't need attention. They just exist in the background like a ghost in the system. Redditors have noted that certain active accounts follow patterns established by the disappeared ones. The timing of posts, the neutrality of tone, the precision of detail. Even phrases occasionally echo older accounts. Some users speculate these accounts are copycats. Others think they may be continuations accounts, created by the same individuals using new names. But no one knows for sure. And because these accounts are still active, the question becomes immediate and terrifying. What else do they know? Who else are they observing? And how much of it will we never see until it's too late? Some Redditors have taken it upon themselves to track these active accounts. They compile posts, screenshots, timestamps, anything that might reveal a pattern. What they found is both fascinating and terrifying. The accounts often operate in small, specialized subreddits, ones where posts are easily buried, communities about local events, hobby groups, discussion boards for niche topics. At first, the posts seem innocuous: a correction about a minor fact, a precise description of a location, a comment on an event no one else noticed. But as users follow the posts over time, the pattern emerges. Observations are extremely consistent. Tone remains neutral and detached. Posts are placed at exact times, often late at night. Details match events later reported elsewhere. One Redditor documented an active account over 6 months. They noticed a small series of posts in a subreddit about local parks. The account described times, paths, and minor interactions, people walking dogs, jogging, leaving benches, details no casual observer would normally notice. Weeks later, users reported events in the news or posted personal accounts that matched the observations almost exactly. Even the smallest details lined up, like the number of steps someone took before turning a corner or the placement of items left on a table. Other Redditors have documented accounts observing individuals repeatedly. One account, still active, seems fixated on daily routines of people in public places, not celebrities, not public officials, ordinary people moving through ordinary lives. Posts are emotionless. Posts are matter of fact. Posts do not speculate or dramatize, but for those who follow closely, the precision becomes chilling. These active accounts occasionally hint at events before they are publicly known. A minor argument between two people, an accident on a street, an unexpected confrontation in a public space. In each case, the account posts details hours or days before the event is reported elsewhere. The posts never claim credit. They never apologize. They never explain. Redditors comparing old accounts with these active ones have noticed similar phrasing, timing patterns, and observational structure. The same detachment, the same repetition, the same calm precision. Some speculate that the original ghost accounts inspired these active ones. Others believe that some active accounts may actually be the same users under new usernames, continuing their activity quietly, carefully, without detection. And this brings an unsettling truth to light. These accounts may be watching now, right now, tracking events as they unfold, not for notoriety, not for followers, not for drama, but simply to observe, to alert, to record, to exist in the background. For Redditors, the feeling is unavoidable. Every time you check a thread, every time you post, every time you comment, you could be a part of someone's pattern. And because the accounts are still active, the potential scope of their observation is endless. Some posts from these active accounts have caused outright panic in small communities. A post in a local subreddit described a minor altercation in detail, not names, not photos, just precise observations. The exact time a person left their house, the route they took to a store, the exchange they had with someone along the way. At the time, no one else had reported it. No cameras, no witnesses, just the account's description. When other users later confirmed the events, they realized the account had been watching before anyone else knew. Another example involved a minor car accident. The account noted the position of vehicles, the behavior of drivers, and small details about bystanders. Days later, when local news reported the incident, every detail matched perfectly, even the small things no one would expect anyone else to notice. The unsettling part is not just the accuracy, it's the tone. The posts read as though someone is taking notes in a notebook, not sharing a story or seeking attention. There's no exaggeration, no dramatization, no engagement, just observation. Redditors who have tracked these active accounts over time report a psychological toll. Anxiety when noticing the same account appear in multiple subreddits. Paranoia that mundane posts or activities might be observed. Sleepless nights after piecing together fragments of events described by the account. Some users describe it like being watched not by a single person but by a presence within the platform itself. Calm, neutral, relentless, and the moderators and admins have occasionally intervened. Posts are deleted, accounts are temporarily suspended. Sometimes the activity ceases for a few days. But the accounts always adapt. They resurface in different subreddits. They slightly reword content. They exploit gaps in Reddit's moderation to continue posting. And the accounts never break character. They remain calm, detached, precise. Some Redditors have begun documenting these accounts meticulously. Timelines of posts, cross-references with reported events, screenshots and archives. But even with documentation, the accounts continue to operate in the shadows, always a step ahead of detection. The truth is terrifying. Some of these accounts are still observing, still recording, still active. And they will remain so potentially for as long as Reddit exists. The posts may never be fully understood. The users behind them may never be identified. And the fragments of reality they leave behind may continue to haunt communities indefinitely. It's a reminder of the unseen presence lurking in online spaces. Someone is always watching, documenting, or recording. And sometimes you don't know you're part of it until it's too late. These are the scariest users on Reddit. The ones who observe without emotion, document without consent, and leave traces that linger long after they disappear. Some are gone. Some are silent. And some are still active right now, even after accounts disappear, even after posts are deleted, even after threads are archived or locked. Some users leave a mark that doesn't fade. The scariest users on Reddit aren't remembered because of drama, memes, or viral content. Oh, they're remembered because of presence. Not the presence of a person, but the presence of a pattern. A way of observing, documenting, and existing in online spaces that feels almost inhuman. Every account we've explored shares a common thread: detached, precise tone, observational, matter-of-fact posts, accuracy so chilling it cannot be ignored, a tendency to vanish or resurface with fragments intact. These are the users who make others uneasy not by what they say, but by how silently they operate, how consistently they behave, and how impossible it is to escape their trace. Some leave trails that seem innocuous at first, minor corrections, small observations, quiet participation in niche subreddits, but those trails grow over time. A comment here, a post there, patterns form, connections appear, and eventually the presence of these users becomes undeniable. Even when accounts vanish, the traces remain. Archived posts, screenshots, reposted fragments. Redditors discover them months, even years later, and the patterns are still recognizable. It's almost like these users are built to leave echoes. Even the disappeared accounts, the ones moderators tried to erase, continue to exist in the memories of the communities they touched, in the discussions they sparked, in the paranoia, curiosity, and obsession they left behind. This is why they stay unforgettable, not because they demand attention, not because they are loud or dramatic, but because their existence challenges the platform itself. Reddit is a space built for anonymity and discussion. It allows people to speak freely, to share stories, to interact without consequences, and these users exploit that freedom, but they do it in a way that feels almost inhuman. They aren't looking for fame. They aren't role-playing. They aren't seeking validation. They are simply documenting, observing, recording, and they do it so consistently, so accurately, and so quietly that they cannot be ignored. Even when they disappear, the communities remember, because their posts don't just report events, they leave questions, loose thread, hints of knowledge that no one else possesses. That uncertainty lingers. It keeps people coming back to old threads, searching for old usernames, piecing together fragments of activity, and that sense of unease, the idea that someone somewhere is observing, persists. The impact of these users goes beyond individual posts. They affect entire communities. Subreddits where they were active develop a certain tension, a quiet paranoia, a lingering curiosity. Moderators notice it first. Threads are slower to generate comments. Users hesitate to post. People begin second-guessing what they share because the presence of these accounts demonstrates a simple truth. Someone may be observing, grew up, recording, or documenting. Even in the most benign discussions, even in the smallest corners of Reddit. Long after the accounts vanish, users revisit old threads. They analyze posts that once seemed ordinary. They notice patterns they overlooked before. They wonder if certain events described were more than coincidence. In some cases, entire subreddits have documented the activity of a single user, screenshots, archives, timelines, cross-reference posts with news reports, all to try to understand the methods of someone who left almost no trace yet whose work remains. Some users report anxiety, sleepless nights, or an uneasy sense of being watched. It's a psychological effect that persists long after the account is inactive. Even new users who stumble upon archived posts experience it. Even years later, these accounts influence the way people interact online. And that's part of why they remain unforgettable. Because it's not about what they posted. It's about the awareness they create. The realization that online spaces are not entirely private. That someone may be observing, recording, and existing alongside you silently, consistently, and without emotion. Some communities refer to this as the shadow effect. Even when accounts disappear, the feeling remains. Threads feel different. Conversations feel more cautious, and users sense patterns where none may exist. It's a subtle, lingering reminder of presence and observation. Even active accounts amplify this effect. The ones still posting today continue to create tension. Small observations or subtle corrections show details no one else notices, and yet their presence is unmistakable to those who follow closely. Some users speculate about motivations. Are they documenting for personal reasons? Are they part of larger experiments? Are they simply fascinated by observation itself? No one knows for sure. And maybe that's the point, because uncertainty is what keeps these users unforgettable. They leave traces that cannot be ignored, patterns that linger, hints of knowledge that may never be fully understood. Even without drama, even without interaction, even without recognition, they exist. And their existence changes the way Redditors think, post, and observe. It's subtle, it's pervasive, it's permanent. The most unnerving part is that these users don't need to interact to leave an impression. They don't argue, they don't troll, and they don't seek attention. All they do is exist. An existence when paired with precision, observation, and silence becomes unforgettable. Even when moderators intervene, even when accounts vanish, or even when posts are deleted or threads locked, the echoes remain. Redditors stumble across old comments. They notice patterns in usernames. They see the same tone repeating in different corners of the site, and the fear is subtle but persistent. Someone, somewhere, is always watching, always documenting, always leaving traces that linger. The accounts we've explored, from the user who knew too much, to the one who never broke character, to the ghost account Reddit tried to erase, share this ability. They don't exist to entertain, they don't exist to brag, they don't exist to create drama. They exist to record, to observe, to leave a mark that survives long after they disappear. Some accounts are gone, though some are dormant. Some are still active, lurking quietly in threads, posting small observations that go unnoticed by most users. And even those fragments, no matter how small, carry the weight of presence. The accounts we've discussed have left communities on edge. They've created patterns that are impossible to ignore. They force users to question what is real, what is observed, and what is being recorded beyond their awareness. And it's the subtlety that makes them so terrifying, because you don't see it immediately. You don't notice the patterns at first. It's only when you scroll through months or years of posts that the scope becomes clear. And by then, the impact has already taken hold. You realize that online spaces, even ones meant to be anonymous and safe, can never be entirely private. Someone is watching, someone is recording, someone is existing in the background. And perhaps that's what makes these users unforgettable. Not the posts, not the events described, not the theories or speculation, but the presence, the quiet, persistent, unshakable presence that lingers long after the account has vanished. The awareness that somewhere in the vast expanse of Reddit, the unseen observer is still there, watching, recording, remaining. And for those who follow carefully, who notice the patterns, who piece together the fragments, the fear is unavoidable, and so she would say, because you understand the truth. The scariest users on Reddit aren't the ones who scream, threaten, or provoke. They're the ones who exist quietly, who observe without emotion, who document without consent, and who leave behind a presence that cannot be forgotten. So next time you scroll through Reddit late at night, next time you notice an oddly precise comment, a neutral observation that seems almost too accurate, remember this: somewhere someone may be watching, and their posts, their presence, their patterns will stay with you long after you close your screen.